you did, from Shepherd's Terrace. He had his mission to think of, and you'd be very conceited if you thought he ought to have let you interfere with it. As it happened, you worked in quite well with the mission at first. Then Fate stepped in, and made the band play a different dance tune. No military march, but a love waltz. That wasn't his fault. And I have to remind you of all this, because you're glaring at Captain Fenton now as if he'd done something wrong, instead of fine, and he can't praise himself." As she finished, out of breath, having dashed on without a single comma, the giant black musicians in the garden began to sing a strange African love song, in deep rich voices, their instruments, which had played with precision European airs, suddenly pouring out their primitive, passionate souls. "Biddy dear," said the girl in a small meek voice, "thank you very much, and you're just sweet. But I didn't need even you to defend him to me. I was only just stopping to breathe, for fear my heart would burst, because I was dizzy with too much joy. I worship him, and you can both go away now, please. We don't want you." We went. Biddy would have fallen downstairs if I hadn't caught her round the waist. Needless to say, I didn't look back, but Biddy did, and should, by rights, have been turned into a pillar of salt. "My gracious, but they're beautiful!" she gasped. "For goodness' sake, let's dash as fast as we can, down into the garden and do the same thing." "What?" I floundered. "Why, you duffer, kiss each other like mad." Boiling with excitement, when I met Cleopatra later in the ballroom, I told her what was going on above, in the moonlight on the roof. "At last your niece knows what I think you have guessed all along, but so wisely kept to yourself," I said. "About Fenton, I mean. It's all right between those two now. They will come downstairs engaged." "Everybody is engaged," Cleopatra stormily retorted. "That's exactly what I remarked to Brigit, before I could persuade her to follow the general example. 'Everybody in the world is engaged except ourselves,' are the words I used." "And except me," added Mrs. East. "You forgot me, didn't you?" "Never!" I insisted. "You can be engaged to a dozen men at any moment, if you wanted to." "I think you're exaggerating a little, Lord Ernest," Cleopatra replied modestly and unsmilingly. But her countenance brightened faintly. "Of course there are a few men. There were some in New York—" "You don't need to tell me that," I assured her. "I feel as if I'd like to tell you something else," she went on, "if you can spare a few minutes." "Will you sit out the next dance?" I asked. "It isn't a bunny hug or a tango, or anything distracting for lookers on." "Aren't you dancing with Brigit?" "No such luck. I mean, fortunately not. She has grabbed Slatin Pasha, and forgotten that I exist. By Jove, there come Miss Gilder and Fenton. What a couple! They're rather gorgeous waltzing together, what?" "Very nice," said Cleopatra, trying with all her over-amuleted heart not to be acid. "But oh, Lord Ernest, that settles it. I must be engaged myself, before Monny brings him to show me, like a cat with a mouse it's caught. Otherwise I couldn't stand it, and afterward would be too late." Hastily I rushed her out into the garden, where the shoebill regarded her with one eye of prehistoric wisdom. If she really were a reincarnation, I'm sure he knew it, and had probably belonged to her in Alexandria, when she was queen. "There's a Mr. Talmadge in New York," she went on, wildly. "He said he would come to me from across the world at a moment's notice, if I wired. Only it would be awkward if I announced our engagement tonight, and then found he'd changed his mind. Besides, he'd be a last resort, and Sayda Sabri said I ought—" "Why not wire Sir Marcus?" I ventured. If his telegram had not come yesterday, I would have as soon advised Cleopatra to adopt an asp. "Oh, well, I was thinking of it. That's one thing I wanted to ask your advice about. I believe he does love me." "Idolizes is the word. And then, now and then in the night I've had a feeling it was almost like a wasting something providential to refuse a Marcus Antonius. Sayda Sabri warned me to wait for a man named Anthony, whom I should meet in Egypt. That's why but no matter now. The lark is a dreadful obstacle, though. How could I live with a lark?" "Lady Lark has quite a musical lilt." "Do you think so? There's one thing, even if you're the wife of a marquis or an earl, you can only be called Lady this or that. You might be anything. He's taller than Antoun, I mean Captain Fenton, and his eyes are just as nice, in their way. They quite haunt me since Philae. But, Lord Ernest, he has some horrid, common little tricks. He scratches his hair when he's worried. If you look up his coat sleeves you catch glimpses of grey Jaeger, a thing I always felt I could never marry. And worst of all, when he finishes a meal, and goes away from the table, he walks off eating." "I don't suppose," said I, "that your first Marcus Antonius ever went away from a table at all, on his feet anyhow, while you were doing him so well in Egypt. He had to be carried. I call Sir Marcus (and I stole the Sirdar's epithet for the other Anthony) a romantic figure. His adoration for you is a sonnet. There's no H in his name to bother you. And he fell in love at first sight like a real sport, I mean like the hero of a book. If he has ways you don't approve you can cure them, redecorate and remodel him with the latest American improvements. Why, I believe he'd go so far as to give his lark a tail if you asked him to spell it with an E." "Well, I suppose you're right about what I'd better do," she sighed. "A bird in the hand oh, I'm not making a silly pun about a lark is worth two in New York. Please tell every one you see I'm engaged to Sir Marcus, for he is my bird in the hand, and I'll send off a telegram the first thing to morrow morning, for fear he hears the news that he's engaged to me prematurely. Where is he? Do you know?" "By to morrow morning he'll be at Merrow Camp," I said. But I did not add, "So shall we." Chapter 30